In the silence of space. The vastness of space stretched out before them, a brilliant tapestry of distant stars and other celestial wonders. Lena and Victor sat in the cockpit of the Fimble Lobi, the newly acquired ship that felt both alien and familiar. They'd just departed the cacophonous hive of Proxima Station, swapping its neon hustle and bustle for the serenity of the void. Victor sat at the helm, his icy blue eyes reflecting the starlight as he guided the ship deeper into space. His expression was one of relaxed concentration, his earlier excitement now replaced with a quiet fascination. Seated beside him, Lena's gaze wandered from the dazzling view outside to the ship's controls, her mind still processing their recent escapade. Lena took a moment to study the ship's interior, admiring the craftsmanship of the Lobi. It was a hardy model, renowned for its endurance and reliability, but beneath its robust facade, the Lobi was undeniably charming, boasting a homely retro aesthetic that put her at ease. Just as Lena had begun to relax into her chair, the mood inside the Lobi took a sudden chilling turn. The gentle hum of the engine abruptly ceased. A sudden silence fell over the Lobi. A series of warning signals sprang to life on the console, casting a red glow over Victor's puzzled face. Lena felt a gentle lurch as the ship's forward momentum began to falter. She could feel a soft, nagging pull as the residual artificial gravity started to fail, loose items floating upwards in slow spirals. Victor tapped rapidly at the controls, his eyes flicking between the indicators. His brow furrowed in concentration and concern, but no matter how firmly he pressed the controls, they remained unresponsive. Outside, the Lobi was barely a shadow against the tapestry of distant stars and nebulas, a tiny vessel adrift in the vastness of space. Inside the ship, Lena and Victor shared a glance. Neither needed to voice the reality they faced. The silence of the once lively Lobi said it all. Victor stared worriedly at the unresponsive console, his fingers moving furiously over the control panel in a vain attempt to reboot the ship's systems. Lena, too, swung into her own form of action, her experienced eyes darting to various corners of the cockpit, probing for any visible malfunction. As minutes turned into an hour, their early sense of urgency gave way to a weary resignation. The Lobi remained unresponsive to their attempts, a silent, stubborn beast floating aimlessly through the cosmic void. Lena slumped back in her chair, her usually bright eyes clouded with a mix of frustration and disbelief. Victor, on the other hand, ran a hand through his hair, a weary sigh escaping his lips. Despite the deep-rooted worry gnawing at their hearts, they had no choice but to admit the inevitable. They were adrift in space, with no immediate means of regaining control over the Lobi. As the silence stretched between them, Lena's eyes drifted to the glove compartment. An issue of Star Atlas sat there, its colorful cover depicting far-off galaxies and celestial events. It was a strange comfort to her, the printed cosmos against the cold, actual vacuum outside the Lobi. The irony wasn't lost on her. She chuckled faintly to herself, then turned her gaze back to Victor. Lena watched him for a moment, then cleared her throat, shifting in her seat.
Vic?
She began, her voice cutting through the quiet. He looked over at her, an unspoken question in his eyes. She hesitated for a moment before continuing.
Have you ever thought about the meaning of it all?
She asked, gesturing vaguely with her hand, encapsulating their current situation and beyond. There was a pause as Victor studied her, his eyes narrowing slightly in contemplation.
The meaning?
He echoed, not dismissive but genuinely seeking to understand her question. Victor leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms over his chest. He stared out into the vast expanse of space before them, his eyes reflecting the distant stars.
The meaning of it all,
he mused, his voice a soft rumble in the stillness.
Well, I suppose everyone's got their take on that, haven't they?
His gaze drifted back to Lena. There was an earnest curiosity in his eyes, something she hadn't quite expected.
For me,
he began, a wistful smile gracing his features.
It's the curiosity, the exploration, the idea of venturing into the unknown, discovering new things.
His voice trailed off and he chuckled, shaking his head as if he couldn't quite believe his own words.
But it's more than that,
he continued.
It's the grandiosity of it all, the knowledge that we're just small pieces in this vast universe, yet we still have the capacity to leave our mark, to create our own story among everyone else's. That's what drives me, keeps me going.
For a moment, Lena simply watched him, her eyes thoughtful. She looked down at her hands, her fingers tapping against the surface of the Star Atlas magazine in a rhythmic pattern.
You know,
She began, her voice surprisingly soft.
I think for me it's the connections. The people you meet, the friendships you make.
She glanced up at Victor, her eyes warm.
They matter. They make a difference.
As she continued, her gaze wandered past Victor and towards the Lobi's viewing window. Her brows furrowed slightly, her words momentarily trailing off.
The chance to connect with people, learn their stories, share in their lives. It brings meaning to my own. And it's those connections that keep me going.
Lena resumed, her voice steady again.
They ground me, give me a sense of purpose.
But her attention seemed to be steadily drifting. Her gaze locked onto something outside the ship. A speck of light had appeared in the distance, growing steadily larger. For a moment, she merely watched it before her voice called Victor's attention to it.
Vic,
She said, pointing towards the light.
look.
As Victor followed Lena's pointed finger, he caught sight of the mysterious, luminous object approaching their ship. He squinted, leaning closer to the glass, a mixture of uncertainty and curiosity flickering across his face.
Any idea what that is?
He asked, keeping his eyes trained on the approaching light. Lena shook her head, her gaze unwavering from the view ahead.
Not sure,
She admitted.
but it's definitely moving towards us.
A tension seeped into the cabin, a palpable sense of the unknown mingling with their earlier introspective mood. Yet beneath that layer of uncertainty, there was a shimmer of hope. Their conversation paused, replaced by a shared anticipation of the approaching entity.
Guess we're about to find out.
Victor finally muttered, more to himself than to Lena. The silence hung heavy between them as they watched the light draw nearer. Then Lena spoke, her voice soft, barely more than a whisper, her gaze never leaving the sight of the approaching light.
You know, Vic,
She began, her tone gentle, a stark contrast to the suspenseful silence.
there's something else that keeps me going.
Victor turned his gaze from the approaching light to Lena. He said nothing, simply offering her a small nod to continue, his expression open and attentive. Lena didn't look his way, her gaze transfixed by the advancing glow in the void of space.
Never losing hope.
She declared. As she spoke, a smile curved her lips, a soft, hopeful expression that lit up her face. Her voice was steady, confident, and, despite their predicament, filled with optimism. Then a crackling sound interrupted their somber peace. The emergency communication system of the Lobi flickered into life.
Well, well, well.
A grating voice echoed in the stillness of the ship, causing them both to turn towards the sound in unison. Lena's fingers flew to the communication console, her eyes wide. Victor clenched his fists, his jaw setting in determination. The voice let out a malicious chuckle that set their nerves on edge.
Hope you're enjoying the ride. Fancy seeing you here.
Recognition flashed across both of their faces as the voice identified itself. Thrax. Suddenly, the hopeful light that was slowly growing larger was no longer a beacon of hope, but a growing threat. The Lobi, their silent ship, felt more like a sitting duck now.
Never losing hope, huh?
Victor murmured, meeting Lena's gaze, a hint of a smile playing on his lips.